Happy New Year, Kubernetes folks. This is January 6th. It's the Monday release engineering meeting. This is a meeting that is recorded and available on the internet, so please be mindful of what you say and do. Please be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, and in general, just be awesome people. So as I mentioned before I started recording, we don't have a very large agenda. But if there is something that you want to discuss, please take a moment to drop that in the open discussions section. So first off, or I guess only off right now, I've been working on a tool that we were talking about a little bit, Hannes, myself, and Tim, during KubeCon. It is called Cube PKG. Our Cni Package. The idea for that tool is basically that we want to be able to build debs and RPMs for the Kubernetes artifacts that we publish to GCS, Google Cloud Storage. So what we'd like to be able to do is allow anyone to build them and build them inside or outside of our normal staging and release process. So I've had some PRs that I've been cranking around for a little bit. The first one merged recently, Friday, maybe? Yeah, Friday, I think. So that was essentially a refactor of what was the deb builder. So a little background context for people who haven't played around with this before. We have two separate tools that we use to build debs and RPMs. On the deb side, it is a Go tool. And on the RPM side, it is a bash script run a Docker container that does a few seds to replace some of the information. So what I eventually would like to see is us get to a place where we're using a single tool to build both the debs and the RPMs. So I've been working on, I'll just share my screen. So the first piece was essentially just taking the deb portion of it, or what was in the deb builder, and moving it to a format that was a little closer to what we've been working on the CREL side, or the Kubernetes Release Toolbox side. So it's a tool that now takes command line options from Cobra and is properly formatted and all that good stuff, and has like some general semblance of testing, which has not been the case for this repo for some time. So thank you in general to everyone who's been working on that, Sasha, Hannes, Dan, the scores of other people who have been reviewing those PRs around CREL and Cube PKG. The second piece that I've been doing is here, and that is templating and RPM support. Right, so after it was refactored to look a little bit more like CREL, the second piece of that was my computer's frozen. Awesome. Okay, all right. The second piece of that was to support templating in the package specs, and then add support for building RPMs. So so first, any questions on any of this? Do I need to back up on anything? All right, cool. So what I was noticing is now that I've spent some time with the tool, what I was noticing is that we kind of submit a few options for the tool, we let it run, and then we expect binaries at the end. Something that happens in between those two places is that it takes a set of templates that are stored in the repo and writes various variables to the templates, so that whether it's the name of the package, the dependencies of the package has, the revision for the package, the download links, and so on and so forth. So we can actually look at that here. Okay, awesome. So as an example, we could look at the control section for one of the debs, right? So this is the Kubernetes Cni package, And you know, the way it's kind of laid out right now, this is a little too big. The way it's kind of laid out right now is we've got a, okay, cool. Sorry, computer technical difficulties. So we've got the build directory within that debs. It's now renamed to templates because that's actually what those are. And then essentially the directory structure that would be required by DPKG build package, or so changelog, the compatibility file, the control file. So just for an example, we can look at the control file and see that there's some Go templating happening here on the build arch. And if we looked at a file like the KubeADM one, we could look at maybe the rules for KubeADM, right? And you can see that there's more templating, the download link base, the architecture. So basically telling you exactly where to curl and drop this into the build workspace for Debian. And then, you know, all the instructions to actually build the deb. So I wanted to do something close to that for the RPM side, but I also wanted to make it so that what often happens is what always happens is that we build a package and we don't have an idea of what the spec was at the point in time that we built it. That's not committed to a repo anywhere, so it's kind of like a. And then we also have the problem that as we improve these tools, the way that we do things changes, right? So say we bump a dependency, the next time that we build packages for the next time that we build packages for different architectures for that package, kubelet, what have you, if we have changed the dependencies, basically every version behind that, the next time that we build packages, it will take the dependencies that we've configured, the dependencies that are currently configured in the repo, right? So if if the required version or the minimum version for Kubernetes Cni was 0.75, which currently is, although Kubernetes Cni 0.83 is out right now. If we were to build a version, if we were to bump the minimum version to 0.83 for Kubernetes Cni, that means every version of Kubernetes that we built, Kubernetes Cni that we built from there forward would take that minimum version. So someone isn't muted right now, and they're kind of breathing into the mic, if you don't mind muting. So what we kind of want to do is make sure that we can write the specs to the repo so we understand what the specs were at the point in time that we built them. And then we also want to start versioning the repo. So to give you an example of this, we can do, so I basically added a step in between looking for the templates, writing and building the packages, which is actually templating them, writing, and then making a decision on whether or not we wanted to just stop the process at that point, right? So let's just look at what that looks like. So, and right. So the debs, which you're used to seeing, making the screen a little bigger, are here, right? And debs. Right. So if we just did debs and let's say, so basically this, you can see the help for this. Now, so you can supply a few flags to this utility, and what we're going to do is we're going to do kubepkg and we're going to choose one packet. We're going to choose one channel, right? So channels are release testing and nightly. So things that actually land in the GCS Kubernetes release slash release bucket. And then testing is stuff that lands. So release is the official releases of Kubernetes. The testing channel are the pre-releases of Kubernetes. So anything with an alpha, beta, RC in the version, and then nightly would be CI build, right? So let's do release, and then let's say Arch. We're going to do AMD 64, which is our usual, and we'll choose a package, which will be kubectl, right? And if I say spec only, this is a new feature. If I say, okay, cool, awesome, it's channels. And I'm still wrong. Okay, I've got to add actually add the command, right? So these are some debug messages that I'm fixing in this PR right now. This is on the active branch that I'm working on, but it lets you know that we're constructing the build. We've successfully constructed the builds, and then we're starting to walk them. We're looking at what the Kubernetes version is. We're setting that version. We're figuring out what the download link is going to be, and then setting the version for the individual package, right? And then starting to build the package for so this is the Go architecture, and then the deb or RPM build architecture, right? Lets you know that spec only mode was selected, and then says that we successfully walked the build, right? So looking at those builds, if we were to do, so this is in my temp directory right now, we can see that, wow, so many things. Okay, right. So we can see that what it's done is it's written the specs for kubectl AMD 64, and then so those files that you saw before, you can see that they're not now properly, they're no longer templated. We've actually written out that this is going to build 117.0-0, so the version and then the revision of that. Compatibility, not important, right? But kubectl doesn't have any dependencies that we slot in from the tool, but we can see within the rules section that it's also templated out the download link, right? So if I was to click that, it would actually download kubectl, right? Okay, right. So that's cool, right? This is basically filling in an intermediary step that we were not writing out before. As a release engineer, I might then say, okay, well, these are the ones that are for the current release. I'm going to take these and copy them into the repo, right? And then commit a PR. So I think this will probably be, once this tool is kind of not moving around as much, I think that will probably be the process. Maybe for 118, we can start writing the specs out to the repo. So this would be a task for the release engineers, the release managers to do, branch manager and the patch release team before they actually cut the debs, right? And then the idea would be to also add a template directory flag to the tool, so that we could run the tool against a specific template directory, as opposed to having it generate the template on the fly, right? That way we know that something that we've put in the repo, something that we've already committed to the repo is exactly what we're going to be building against, right? So now if we want to look at a different one, I will also fix this piece where you've got to change directories, right? So I've got to go to the RPMs directory right now, and then from here, I can do something similar. Let's say I want to build kubeadm this time, and I want to build it for all architectures, and I want to do, let's say, a nightly build. All right, just changing that to RPMs, and away we go. Right, so you can see it says some more stuff this time because it's looking at building that stuff for, it's looking at building specs for multiple architectures, right? Now over to, we can do code 063, right? And this now, so notice now we've got, just make that a little bigger. So notice now that we've got not just the package, not just the channel, but also the package name and the set of architectures that it's building for. And if we look at one of those specs, I've got some to-dos in here because it's still an active PR, but we can look at the spec and see that, okay, it's told me exactly where to go get this. It knows what it has to pull in. These still need to be templatized, but it's also replaced the version and the release number for that, right?
Would this be a reasonable place to ask a question about version
Yes.
strings and collect people's opinions?
Yeah, sure.
So one of the patterns that we've talked about is having this idea of immutable artifacts and building things and promoting them across channels. If we have a version string like shown here, where the string literal alpha or beta or RC is included in the version, we can't do that promotion pattern because we would have to change that string and rebuild.
Right.
I, from past career experience, really like this promotion idea and not rebuilding things so that what we deliver is what we tested as opposed to something that was built after test passed.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird bugs sneak into the universe that way.
Yeah, sure.
But
So,
I'm curious what other people think, and this would be a notable change to how we've done things today.
So the first thing I will start that conversation off is, one, we need to be more diligently testing the packages that we're creating, which is not necessarily happening as thoroughly as it could be right now. And two, this is something you and I talked about, but just bringing in the idea of promotion to Anago, but it doesn't exist today. So we would have to definitely talk about design. So.
If I may, one thing I'm a bit confused by is I thought the overall goal was to get the specs finally, the RPM, whatever they are called, and the Debian control files and whatnot into KK so that they are versioned with whatever, with upstream, if you will. Now you talked about, in retrospect, generating those files based off of templates and a version or whatever, and then committing it back into KK, if I understand that correctly. Isn't this like kind of the wrong way, if you will, around?
So I disagree with it landing in KK a little bit. The idea of the release repo was, so there is an issue that was opened that's called something like KK is the canonical source for build artifacts or something like that. And that issue was opened as a hope by someone else. I think that the entire reason that the release repo exists is to build the things that we need to use for release engineering. So to move them out of that repo is not the greatest idea. We can already see that there are problems with having interactions between the release repo and the Kubernetes repo with tools like push build, right? So when we did the shell check updates to push build, we broke a decent chunk of all of the tests for Kubernetes, right? So it's something that I would like, if we have tools here, I would like to isolate them from what happens in Kubernetes.
I kind of agree with you. I just think we're talking to two different things. You are talking more about the tooling, which I don't have a big opinion if it should be external to KK or not. But I was talking about just the configuration files to build the packages. I still think they should be versioned with the code and not the other way around, like generated somewhere outside and then the generated stuff put back into KK by a, I don't know, an automatic or manual PR or what have you. I think like the process kind of should be, okay, I check out KK, I run a script or a thing, might be external from K-release or from KK, who cares? And based on the versioned control file, in case for the Debian packages, I think a package should be generated. Now, then we get all into the business Tim talked about, like which version should it have? Should it be promotable, or do we need to repackage it if we promote it from nightly to something else? But generally, I think the main goal should be, the specs should be as close to the code as we can, which means in KK.
Okay.
Otherwise we end up in this weird space where we need to version K-release exactly the way as KK is versioned, basically kind of by commit, because if I bump, I don't know, CRI tools in 1.17, I don't know what, I need to do the exact same thing in K-release. But if the specs are there in KK, we don't care. Like we have the specs, we have our tool in K-release, which takes the specs and does things. If you see what I mean, I don't know if I'm making sense here.
Yeah, no, Tim, go for it. Go for it.
We have a set of artifacts today that span multiple repos, and compared to when that first issue got open about moving things over to KK as the one canonical place, that was, I think, being driven out of the kubeadm folks who subsequently have actually left the KK repo. So I feel like over the last 2 years, we're starting to come around to the idea and need to manage things in separate repos. But when it comes to having a deterministic reproducible build, it gets a little tricky because we've already seen this actually. Was it November or December where the order in which tags are applied in different places can lead to unexpected outcomes, and that you can't ensure that we, in a race-free way, make this thing happen correctly across repos. But I think pragmatically, given the type of changes and who's able to affect changes in the repos, I don't see that being a huge problem to manage them separately at this point. The one thing that appeals to me philosophically, though, about having things close, so the dependencies is another area. There's a few dependencies that are articulated in the RPM or deb specification templates, but there's a whole bunch of other ones, and we need to get to where those are in some sort of a canonical YAML in a single place instead of in 100 different places sprinkled throughout test code and imports and all these different things. Wherever those end up, maybe that would be the place that we should try to have these spec files since they're closely related. I could see them ending up in KK because that's like the core of this, but I don't think as a project, there's been a lot of conversation about where these things are most natural, and whichever one place we choose, it makes things unnatural for other places, because then in order to do things in other places in the project, you have to also check out the other repo. I really like the idea of a place where you just check out KK and you can build the core for all of what build can mean, like including through packaging. But that means that all of these build tools that feel ancillary get conflated with KK. So it's a complicated trade-off. I think we could start out, I mean, since they are separate today, we could start out operating separate, and we could institute, we need to, we've talked about this for a long time, it's clearly recognized, we need to branch the K release repo the exact same way that we do KK. And they need to move in step. We should be building 117 from the 117 release branch of KK and K release. I think if we do that, that gets us an improvement, and then we could decide further whether or where we move repo content.
So what I was going to float actually was, what if we did that in Anago? I know I don't necessarily like the idea of shoving more functionality into Inago, but I would say adding one more repo to tag and release during the release process. So that way it's not a question of like, did we run two processes to cut a release for both the Kubernetes and Kubernetes release, right? It would just be, okay, so we ran a release for Kubernetes, and it cut tags for both Kubernetes and Kubernetes release.
Yeah, why not?
If we have a tagging tool that's generic and that's what's called by Inago, and that tool can tag arbitrary repos, then I think what the overarching tool is that calls all these subtools doesn't matter so much.
Yeah, I would see
But if this
that
is a new addition of a giant chunk of bash to Inago versus contributing to splitting some existing bash out into a generic tool, I would worry about that.
Okay. All right. So that's what it was. That's what the suggestion was. But I would see that the new tool would be Krell, right? So we're not in the place where Krell has replaced Inago yet, or we haven't started refactoring, or we haven't started building out Inago functionality in Krell. But that would be the place I would imagine it would live.
And this would also be a bit of a change required whether to Inago or whatever today is doing the building, because instead of just checking out k-release master, it's going to need to check out the proper branch's head, which is a slight difference. Right now you can check out master, and from that code you could go build anything where you'd need to do separate checkouts to build separate things.
Right. So I would imagine that we'd want to cut the release, the k-release one first, and then use that to cut Kubernetes. But I honestly don't have strong opinions. I think that what I would love to figure out is the promotion process, at least for the artifacts that exist today.
One of the things that I had hoped, going back to the original mention of version, so in packaging, we have the package version number, which typically is always just 0 in our builds. I had hoped that we would get to a place where we were building from committed code, not taking committed code, generating intermediate artifacts, and building from the intermediate artifacts. And in that world, if we had something that was always bumping the package version number, then we'd have a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3. As you typically see in the world of debs and RPMs today, if you look at your installed packages from the distro, it might be Kubernetes 1.17.0 dash whatever, some distro version-y number stuff, 136, because they've built 136 times, but each one was a unique thing. And it just happened that 136 was the one that they delivered as the release. If we have a number that's moving up always, and all of our builds have a unique number, then I understand for humans, alpha, beta, RC have some significance as a string, but we would be able to say, like, currently build 136 is beta, and 3 weeks later maybe it's build 136 is actually still RC because we're so ultra stable in this magical future. And then later build 136 is the release build, and it's just the channel from which you download it, whatever the highest number there is the one that you get. Like, this is a standard process in software engineering, I feel like, out there in the world, but it's fairly different than what we're doing today.
Yeah, I think the real question is, how do we get there, right? Because we have some semblance of build number right now, right?
There is a lot of code, and we could go that direction as well. It could be a commitish, but I think before, like, how we get there feels relatively mechanical. There's 100 places in the code that need fixed to achieve a particular goal, but I want to make sure we talk about the goal and have agreement of that, because I foresee this being a KEP, and we would need to convince the rest of the community, because there's going to be, beyond our code that generates these artifacts, there's people who have set and awk scripts that are used to a particular form of that string, and we would be breaking them surely.
I mean,
Yeah.
I guess one thing we need for that is a canonical, if you will, master Debian mirror, same for RPMs, because essentially what it boils down right at time of building, I need to figure out what is the last number I built for this specific version or commit hash. And I don't think we have that, but inside Google, so we don't have real access to that. I mean, well, that's not entirely true. We could also just slap some file in some bucket and manage that ourselves.
That's the
Yeah,
plan.
those are the two patterns. You can have a file that you check out, increment, commit, or you can also just go with the commit ID. I do like the idea of a simple, shorter number because it's a little easier for humans to see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 integer versus 7 or 8 digits of hex.
I think the commit ID wouldn't really fly because it's not necessarily sortable. If you are talking
True.
about the hash, right?
Yeah.
But
Yep.
To start out with, we could just do the date timestamp or something, you know.
Yeah, that's a good point. We have requirements beyond just the uniqueness, and sortability is an important one for humans.
Not only for humans, also for the packaging system.
For the package man, yeah.
That's true. Yeah, we hit bugs on that. Yeah.
But
in theory, the part after the dash at the end shouldn't.
I think it
exactly
should
matter.
So?
Well,
I mean,
it does. Yes, you're right. You're right. It does. Yeah. It does. As long, well, so that goes back to how, okay, so it does matter in the implementation. We've seen both in apt and yum and DNF, both, all three, and I think some others as well. It does matter in the implementation of the consuming tool, but if you do publication correctly, it doesn't matter because you publish as a distro and you only publish in a given directory, you only have the latest of one of each of your packages. So that's another thing that we've done strangely in our distro.
So yeah, so I totally agree there. I'm trying to figure out what is the next right step.
But I think this is good philosophical discussion. I think the steps that you're implementing at the moment are steps that are valid along this progression towards that end goal. And I don't necessarily see anything in conflict there at the moment.
Yeah, so the idea was to get us to, so if you're in any way, shape, or form around the release process or the eventual packaging process that happens behind the Google curtain, so people who are branch managers or patch release team members, you know that they kind of run a tool called Rapture, and Rapture builds the packages and then raptures them up to the Google package repositories, right? Currently, the way that tool is configured requires them to use an older version of our release tooling. So I think so there are multiple things that have to happen at the same time. Like we need to build something that is, or we need to have Rapture in some way restructured so that it supports the continued improvements that we're making on the repo to build artifacts, right? We also need to eventually own the way we're publishing the artifacts, right? So making sure that we're migrating off of Google infrastructure, and that is also happening. We need tools that support the multiple channels that we're talking about, right? So the nightly, the testing and release channels, so that when we start talking about promotion, we can actually have tools in place that do promotion, right? Or lay down bits that allow us to build things that could be promoted. So yeah, what do you want to do first? What do y'all want to do first?
I wouldn't care. Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
I was mostly going to say, I think if we philosophically are agreeing that we're trying to separate build from publication into multiple phases where there's build, there's test, there's packaging, there's test, there's publication goes into multiple channels. If we have that kind of philosophy, we'll eventually get there. It's going to be iterative. I think we've long ago already decided that we're not going to make one fell swoop where we just simply design this
Yeah.
this new, better place, and it's publishing to a new bucket, and that's the future, and we turn off the old way. How we interact with the existing Google process, though, is tricky around publication. But I think we maybe need to have a conversation about that then, and decide a plan. What could we make for incremental changes that are beneficial, that don't require a lot to be changed on the Google side? Or should we go ahead and make a clean break sooner, even though it's not everything that the existing system is, but just start owning it so that we can iterate?
I'm not sure
Yeah.
what you mean by the Google process.
So when I say the Google process in this context, I'm meaning the Rapture tool by which they internally build artifacts and publish them to the public repos, because they are the ones who have write access to those.
Yeah.
Right. So this doc
As
here.
far as understood, Rapture is only the publishing part. They use K-release and whatever we have in there to build the stuff. And then they push it somewhere to this Rapture thing, and this magically ends up in being published as app.kubernetes something.
I'm using the word Rapture too broadly, I think, and that's where I think I went back to the sort of the Google process, which is also hand wavy, because they do build things, and because of the layout of the directory scheme and the existing contents within those, it all sort of conflates. And as we try to clean things up, the existing publication process is going to end up publishing things that aren't consumable.
Yeah, so we currently have, so basically they do some dependency checks. They check their permissions internally. They clone the repo from the tip of master, and then they actually check out 013. So 013 is before I started changing quite a bit of stuff. So we can see that 013 is 306 commits behind master, right? So this is not an ideal state to be in. Yeah.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is they build it as we build it right now anyway, like on the commit 013, whatever it is.
Right.
So it seems to work. This gives us the opportunity to bring stuff up in parallel, and we can check like how does it compare to whatever the Googlers do. And if we
that
decide
would be an interesting approach, yeah. Like
if we decide, sorry,
go ahead, Hannes. Yeah, go ahead.
If we decide that app.kubernetes.something, the Google thing, is identical or identical enough to our new thing, like we publish on, I don't know, an Azure bucket, I don't care. If we can even automatically check if the packages are the same, or at least show the same versions, or what have you, then we can eventually switch. So I wouldn't spend too much time in like backporting things to Rapture. That's I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think we should provide the like, I think Rapture needs to understand what its input is going to be, and they should factor around that. There are several let's see. There are several instances where like this is biting us right now. So it's like we kind of need to do both.
So maybe this is the time to go ahead and admit that we are forked. I think from a code perspective, we've pretty much just argued with the number of commits between the two variants that we are forked, and to maybe go ahead and just dive in on finishing out. So maybe for the upcoming cycle, we build things the Google way, and we community own and build and publish to the channels as an attempt to see what we think of them, and do things like change that version string and see what we get in the different channels for artifacts, and massage them a bit and get to a point where we're happy with the output. And for 119, maybe we start to talk more seriously about cutting over. We have socialized a kit maybe at that point.
Yeah, so I completely agree, and that's kind of what I have in mind too. I want to note that this is something that is we still definitely need to do, kind of build the new while while maintaining the old or improving
And
the
we
old.
definitely have that part. Like if we do a cap or make a major change like this, it's a breaking change. We're going to have a deprecation cycle, and the existing Google ones are going to get built for the coming year or more. But I'm really confident that the way that these are being improved is going to be more consumable, and people are going to come to prefer the new option, and we're going to find all sorts of bugs continuing to come up in the old one where somebody who gets hit by the old is asked to move to the new because that's the only way that they can get the fix that they need.
Yeah. So definitely things like if anyone has been following the continuing like attempts to upgrade CNI across the packages, or the fact that the CRI tools are not being published currently since 112. So basically new versions of Kubernetes. So 117, it's basically pinned to 112 right now. And this is something that has been ongoing because we don't have, essentially the way our tools are built today, we don't have a way of easily changing the version that we're going to build for. It basically builds the, it's going to build the minimum version, or
Slight nuance though in what you said there. You said the way they're built. I think this is a question of how they're published.
No, it's
and
the way
we choose not to build them differently.
It's the way they're built. Let's spec. Okay, where'd you go? Cool. Yeah, wow, this is not working the way I want it to. Build, RPMs, and keyboard spec. Right. So this just as an example, right? The CRI tools version is static here. And there's no witchcraft that like this is some macro that figures out what the Kubernetes number is. But there are also some things to consider, like if you're trying to build, what if you're trying to build CRI tools for a version that doesn't exist yet, right?
But if you back up for a second, so this is K-release. K-release is not branched. And this one file says 113.0, and we know that we build for things other than Kubernetes 113.0, right? So the way we build today is to modify the spec file and build from the modified uncommitted spec file.
Right.
So if you do that same pattern and change the CRI tool version, you would get a modified CRI tool version. When you publish it, so building the way we build today, you could do that. But when you publish it, you will end up with a apt or RPM yum repo that has that new version, and all prior clients will consume that, which means that they're using an untested combination of components. So I really do think it's the publication phase, and the channels fixes this problem, and we could go back to actually publishing CRI tools that are versioned in accordance with desire.
Yeah. So this goes back to the general thoughts on the Cube PKG work, because that's kind of what I'm going after, having published specs within the repo.
I like it.
So what do you think about maybe going ahead this week or so and updating the branch management handbooks to reflect the two parallel tools? And for the 117 cycle, we try to operate them in parallel, even acknowledging that the new way is a total alpha workflow, but start seeing what that highlights and what we get in the published repos.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm down to do that. There's more work. There's more work.
For sure. But I think that if we document the intended workflow, some of the tooling gaps might be a little more independent, and without conflicting with your code commits, maybe others could make some helpful contributions as well to other parts of it.
Yeah, sure. So question for the class, has anyone handled building after Yum repositories before?
In
No,
parts, yes.
not yet.
Okay.
I've
Is
done
anyone-
Yum ones.
Is anyone interested in working on that stuff?
Before,
Yes.
before, okay. I wanted to say before somebody answers. I think there is one philosophical question we should answer. Like, do we really want to do this ourselves? Yes, we could write tools that do stuff on some buckets and whatever, or we could ask the CNCF if they already have some accounts or can give us accounts at one
Like
of the
open build service or
300
something?
artifact hosting services.
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, we could totally do that.
This has been
open-
one of the longer term questions around the existence of SIG release in general. Like, how much of this is actually needed? Because people frequently say, like, the distributions are already going to do this. Google does this themselves anyway for their Kubernetes. Amazon does it. Microsoft does it. Any company that's shipping an enterprise Kubernetes is going to do this stuff. The community side of it is redundant. But then we have kubeadm, which consumes our SIG release artifacts, right? And so we do have an existing workflow that uses ours, but we don't have data even that tells us much about that usage.
True.
One more
Okay.
reason we should go for hosted services, because we get logs there.
Well, and that's where we own it as well. We would get logs.
Yeah, not true.
Yeah,
Where
but
those logs are Googlers at the moment.
So the one that has been continually popping up is the open build service. If you think we should start investigating, because I was thinking about it over the holiday, and if you think we should start investigating that, that would be, I would be totally fine with that.
I don't know much about the open build service. Just to clarify, I was just talking about the artifact storage, like the apt repo and the RPM repo. So I was thinking about, we use what is it called? kubepkg to build the packages. And then we just hit some random HTTP endpoint, push the package, and magic happens. And there is the updated apt mirror or RPM thing. I was not talking about building the thing.
Yeah, no, that's kind of what's happening today. As far as I understand it, the apt and yum repos are backed with GCS. Right.
In the case of Rapture, yes.
Yeah.
Probably, maybe, who knows?
Probably. And plus,
but
Google Sugar. Yeah.
We could implement this ourselves based on a GCS repo, and I have a work in progress thing for that. But also we could just go to, I don't know what all those services, what they're named, packagehost.io or whatever, and push it there. It's not it's not an hard thing to implement ourselves, but then again, is it an interesting thing? I just want to make sure this package I built is in this channel. Yeah. I don't care how. And that's why I'm kind of voting for, let's use something as a service offering and be done with that.
Could I throw a third option out there, maybe? Just kind of spitballing here. You know, I don't know what it would take. I haven't built a Yum or an app repository, but it'd be great to get into some of these EPEL repositories or some of the extended, you know, upstream branch repositories. And that might be way more work than we're willing to do. But as Kubernetes matures, it would be awesome if you could just grab Ubuntu upstream and install kubectl, for example. Or, like, you know, obviously add a community EPL repo first and then install it. But instead of doing our own thing, see what it'd take to integrate with the existing communities.
Yeah, I know that was brought up a while ago, or like we had done some work, and this is by we I mean the community at large, not any, I think not any of the people who are currently on the call, but we had at some point the Kubernetes packages published somewhere more official, and I think it was maintenance overhead for people. But we should. I'm fine with revisiting that.
I think that would be.
Go ahead, Taylor.
I think that would be good, even if it is something that we delegate away, even if it is like a process that handles a building and it's a third-party tool, there will still be that managing of the integration itself. So I'd say that work would be interesting to kind of handle and get assigned mostly.
From an implementation perspective, I can't speak to the app side of the house, but on the Yum side of the house, this is literally just a couple of make-drs and then copying the files you want to the right places. And a typical workflow might have that happen in an internal test staging place, and then the resulting directory and file structure is rsynced out to the published place. These are like, if you go back to, for the Yum side again specifically, if you go back to when that stuff started in sort of like 1995, the world was a very simple place. You had Apache and directories and files, and it was very simple and flat, and it's kind of followed through to that you can impose a little bit more directory structure for variability, for creating the idea of channels, but it's really, really simple. And the idea of officialness, though, is an interesting one to talk about, because like today, you may get Docker from your distro, or you may add Docker's repositories to your distro config and pull theirs, or Bazel is an example of one where you might pull that from somewhere else. And I feel like if we do this well, we become the canonical source for the Kubernetes bits. Or the community, the community bits anyway. Like the enterprise distros, they're still going to be doing their own, and even the community distros may have their flavor of the thing. But for people who are wanting to run upstream, you just like with Docker, you read Docker's documentation, and it tells you how to add their repo to your config, and you pull from the channel you prefer. That we would be something like that, and that for many users, that's going to feel native and normal, I think.
Yes.
I don't want to cut the conversation short,
yeah.
but if we're having a first 118 meeting in 5 or 6 minutes, should we make sure we vacate this call just to avoid any issues there, or do you think we've got the host key stuff all sorted out for that?
Yeah, everyone. So the release team lead and Shadows have their have the host key now, and the meeting was created earlier today, so they should be fine. As far as the conversation, what do we think are immediate next steps? Are we happy with the general direction, what's been tossed around so far?
Yes.
How much work do you think is remaining on the PKG implementation you're working on?
So I need to break out the code branches for deb and RPMs, basically do something very similar to what the deb side is doing for a D package, build package, and do that for the RPM build section, and wire up CI jobs, actually write the current specs to the repo. I don't think it's too much, but those are also like famous last words. I think it's close. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I was just thinking it seems to make sense to get that tool at least in a working state. It seems like you made some great progress on that. It'd be nice to get that in a point where we could use it to test some of these theories, evaluate some of the alternatives, and start to go down that path. I don't know. I like the idea, like Tim mentioned earlier, of running things in parallel, so we could, still continue to release the way we've always done things while improving upon the existing release. But like you were saying, easier said than done.
Yeah, and for the sake of that discussion, at least, let's one more time to the repo. And yes, Tim, we'll leave like a minute or two earlier. But if we check out this one. Okay. All right, so if you're interested in some of this and what's been going on in kind of the background, where is this issue? You can check out this issue. There are a bunch of things to do ahead of time to make sure that we can actually build Kubernetes on the new infrastructure and then test in parallel. So I've been working on this in a prototype branch. The prototype branch on Kubernetes release, if you want to see some of that work. And all of the PRs are linked up here. So, so yes, that was always my plan to do them in parallel. I don't think we're ever going to see a place where we can cleanly cut between the old and the new. I would love to see. I think we're in a place where we can land a bunch of it for, again, famous last words, for 118, and then try to cut over bits for 119. I had a discussion before we went away to where some of us went away on break with Tim Hawken to talk about like where Kate's infra is and where we are and how we're meeting in the middle and all that good stuff. And I think we're close. So hopefully by the end of January, you should hear more about the image promotion, as well as migration bits, people that need to set up new staging repositories. I think we're already in a good place. We just need to tweak some bits. But again, read that issue. That issue has a bunch of details about what specifically I'm talking about. Any questions?
Nada.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much. It looks like we only needed one topic for the meeting. Thank you so much. It's good to see your faces. Hope you're having a good new year so far. And for anyone who is on the 118 release team or hanging out in that meeting, I will see you in 2 minutes. Take it easy.
Awesome. Happy New Year, everybody.
Adios. Happy New Year, everybody.